They say that every monster was once human. I, Holmes, can tell you that's true. I wasn't born this way. No, I became what I am through a series of choices, decisions that may seem small to the ordinary person, but are monumental to someone like me. I have lived many lives, worn many faces, and each one has been carefully constructed. I am not a man of mere flesh and bone. I am an architect of destruction, a master of deception. But I didn't start out that way. I was born Herman Webster Mudgett in Gilmanton, New Hampshire on May 16, 1861. The name alone tells you everything you need to know. Common, boring, forgettable. But my story was always destined for something far more grand. I was a child of two worlds, one of stringent moral expectations and the other of unspeakable curiosity. My parents were strict, as you might imagine. My father, Levi Mudgett, a devout man, ruled our home with an iron fist. His word was law, and any disobedience was met with harsh punishment. My mother, Theodate, was equally demanding but in a different way. She held tightly to religious ideals and made sure we adhered to them, without exception. Our house was filled with the quiet hum of duty, not affection. Looking back, I realized that my childhood was a storm I never really weathered. I learned to mask my feelings, to put on a face that conformed to what they wanted. I excelled in school, of course. No one could have guessed that beneath my well-mannered appearance, there lay something darker. I was different from the other children. I found comfort in books, in studying things that others found repellent or bizarre. The human body fascinated me. I remember the first time I saw a human skeleton. I was just a child, and my classmates dared me to touch it. They thought it would scare me, but it did the opposite. It intrigued me. How could bones, just lifeless remnants of a person, hold so much power? The body, the soul, it all seemed like a puzzle waiting to be solved. And solve it, I would. High school was when the real cracks started to show. I was still shy, quiet, and somewhat awkward. The other boys would tease me, call me a nerd, but they never understood the mind that was beginning to form behind my eyes. I was no fool. I realized early on that people were easily manipulated. I would say the right words, do the right things, and they would fall in line. In those early years, I began to understand something crucial. People are weak. But my true turning point came when I went to the University of Michigan. It was there, in the halls of academia, that I realized the full extent of my potential. No longer was I merely a student of books. I could be a student of life and death. My studies in anatomy allowed me to experiment in ways most people could never fathom. I learned to dissect not just the human body, but also the human soul. During my time at the university, I discovered the perfect crime. A man could steal bodies, alter them, and claim them as insured property, a simple yet brilliant scam. I didn't just stop at that. I became a master at it. I was able to steal corpses from the university's medical school and use them to collect life insurance policies under false pretenses. I would murder someone, an unsuspecting soul, and replace their body with a stolen cadaver. The insurance companies never knew. I became fascinated with the process, the rush, the thrill of getting away with something so vile. It was intoxicating. I saw myself as a man above others, someone who could transcend morality itself. Why live like the rest of them, bound by rules and laws that only serve to keep the weak in line? No, I wanted more. I wanted power. After completing my studies, I left Michigan and began a new life. I adopted a new name, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. A doctor's title gave me the respect I craved. It gave me authority. But I didn't stop there. I began to play the role of a charming, sophisticated businessman. I set up shop in Chicago, a city teeming with people desperate to find their place in the world. It was the year 1886. The city was on the brink of a great cultural revolution, with the world's Columbian Exposition just around the corner. I saw this as an opportunity to expand my horizons. Chicago was a city built on dreams, and I was going to capitalize on that. I found a pharmacy in Englewood, and just like that, I was in business. But something in me had changed. The pharmacy was just a front, a stepping stone. The true plan was already in motion. Across the street, I purchased an empty lot and I began building. People marveled at the grand design. but they didn't understand what it was truly meant for. They would come to call it the Murder Castle, but that name was too simple. It was my magnum opus, a masterpiece of terror. The Murder Castle was everything I dreamed of and more. It was a 3-story structure full of secret rooms, hidden passages, and floors that led nowhere. I designed every inch of it, ensuring that no one would be able to escape once they entered. The first floor housed shops and offices. The second was for living quarters, and the third was where the real work would be done. Every room was designed to be a trap. I had hidden doors that led nowhere, staircases that went in circles, and floors that would drop into the basement, where I kept a series of tools to dispose of bodies. I had gas lines set up in certain rooms to asphyxiate victims while they slept. I also needed people to fill these rooms. Young women, men who sought work, those who needed a place to stay. They would come to me, eager to find employment or shelter, and I would take them in. They were perfect for my plans, so trusting, so naive. Many of them never left. I remember the first woman I killed in that castle. She was a young, pretty thing, full of hopes and dreams. She came to me looking for work, and I gave it to her. But I couldn't just let her walk out of that door. No, that would have been a waste. I led her up to one of the rooms, showed her around. She thought she was safe. But I had other plans. I turned on the gas. She was dead in minutes. No screams, no fuss, just silence. It was perfect. From there, I killed with efficiency. My victims varied. Women, men, the elderly, the young. It didn't matter. They were all part of my design, each death just another piece of the puzzle. And with each victim, my power grew. I was untouchable, a man who controlled life and death itself. The Murder Castle was not just a place of death. It was a sanctuary for my ambitions. It wasn't enough to simply build a house of horrors. No, I needed to control everything. I needed to make sure the people I invited into my life never left, that they would be swallowed whole by my designs and never, ever be found again. I built the castle meticulously. No one was allowed to work on it for too long. I kept people in the dark, not just about the structure, but about their own roles in it. The workers who helped build the castle never knew the full extent of my plans. Some were fired before they could see the finished product. Others disappeared mysteriously without a trace. It was perfect. In a city filled with so many transient people, no one would question a missing face. I could make anyone vanish. But the castle itself, with its secret rooms, its trapdoors, its gas chambers, and acid vats, was only part of the plan. I understood that it wasn't enough to merely take lives. I had to profit from them. I had to build a financial empire around my activities. After all, death alone is not enough. The game needed to have stakes. I was not just a murderer, I was a businessman. And like any businessman, I knew the value of exploitation. Insurance policies in particular were a goldmine for someone with a mind like mine. I would often persuade my victims to take out life insurance policies. I convinced them to name me as their beneficiary. I would charm them, flatter them, make them believe they could trust me. After all, who wouldn't trust a man of my standing? A doctor, a businessman, a man of respect. And once the policy was in place, it was simply a matter of waiting for the opportune moment. For example, take the case of Benjamin Pitezel, a simple, unremarkable man who crossed my path in 1892. He was a carpenter who had fallen on hard times. I saw in him a perfect opportunity. He was eager to work with me, and I convinced him to take out a life insurance policy. In return, I promised him a share of the profits from a business venture we would start together. But there was one flaw in my plan. The man was too useful to be left alive. Benjamin became a liability. He knew too much about my dealings, and I could not risk him talking. So one night I murdered him. But to collect on the policy, I needed to make it look like an accident. So I staged his death, carefully positioning the body, altering the evidence, and playing the role of the concerned friend. I convinced Benjamin's wife, Carrie, that her husband had died tragically in a fire while I arranged for his insurance payout. I continued my pattern of deception, using the same tactics with others. But Benjamin Pitezel was not the only person I would sacrifice for the sake of money. Oh no, I took it further. Carrie Pitezel, Benjamin's wife, was devastated, but she was gullible and trusting, and so I convinced her that I would look after her children and guide them through this difficult time. She had no idea what I truly meant by that. I took the Pitezel children, 3 of them, each more innocent than the last, and I promised to reunite them with their mother. I even convinced Carrie that I would send for them when it was safe. But in my mind, I knew that none of them would ever see her again. I had already made plans to kill them, just as I had killed their father. The eldest, Alice, was the first. I lured her to my castle with promises of safety, of shelter, of hope. She was young, so trusting, so eager to believe that the world still had good in it. I killed her in one of my special rooms, a chamber designed to kill without leaving a trace. The others followed quickly. The youngest, Howard and Nellie, were disposed of in similar ways. The deaths were easy. But what was more difficult was keeping up the charade. I had to create false documents, forge letters to Carrie, making her believe that her children were still alive, still waiting for her. She, poor woman, was left to believe that her children were safe while I collected their life insurance policies. It was a sick game, one that I played with skill and precision. In the end, their deaths were simply another part of my growing empire. But like all empires, mine too would eventually fall. While I reveled in my success, enjoying the fruits of my labors, I failed to notice something I should have seen coming. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency. Benjamin Pitezel's disappearance caught the attention of the authorities. When Carrie began to question the legitimacy of the letters I sent her, she reached out to Pinkerton. They quickly realized that there was something far darker going on. I had underestimated their tenacity. Detective Frank Geyer of the Pinkerton Agency was assigned to investigate the Pitezel case. He soon discovered the true nature of my crimes, though I still thought I was safe. I thought I could talk my way out of anything, as I always had. But this time, it was different. The bodies were piling up. The castle was beginning to show its true colors. They began to piece together the deaths of Benjamin Pitezel and his children. They uncovered the lies, the insurance fraud, and the bodies hidden in my secret rooms. The walls, the floorboards. They had been stained with death, and no amount of deception could hide the truth forever. I had already fled by the time they were closing in. I ran, as I had many times before, using false identities and shifting from one place to another. But the noose was tightening. The detectives had pieced together my movements and had started to trace my steps. I knew it was only a matter of time before they would catch up with me. I could feel the walls closing in, and yet, even as they pursued me, I was calm, almost serene. After all, I had always known this day would come. It was the final test, the ultimate game. Would I escape, or would I meet my end? They caught up to me in Boston in 1894. I was arrested and brought back to Philadelphia, where my trial would become one of the most sensational in American history. The newspapers had a field day with the details of my crimes, and my name, H. Holmes, became synonymous with evil. But still, I remained calm, detached from the chaos I had caused. The trial was long and drawn out. I defended myself, of course. It was all part of the game. I could not allow anyone to see the true extent of my mind. I wanted to control everything, even in the courtroom. But the evidence was undeniable. The bodies, the witnesses, the confessions. I had nowhere to run. I was convicted of the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, though I confessed to 27 other deaths. Whether those 27 deaths were truth or exaggeration, no one would ever know. The press ate it up, creating a monster from the man who once had hopes of greatness. But in the end, I was nothing more than a man who had outplayed himself. I was sentenced to death by hanging, and on May 7th, 1896, I met my end. As I sat in my prison cell awaiting my execution, the weight of my actions finally began to settle over me, but not in the way you might think. I did not feel guilt, nor did I feel remorse. Such emotions were for weaker men. Instead, I felt a profound sense of detachment, as though I were observing the life of another man entirely. The newspapers called me a demon and a fiend, but they had no idea how small their imaginations were. They reduced my work to sensational headlines: "The Devil in the White City," "The Architect of Murder." They painted me as a caricature of evil, but I knew the truth. What I had built was far greater than their petty understanding. My castle was not merely a house of horrors. It was a monument to my genius, a labyrinthine masterpiece designed to confuse, trap, and ultimately destroy. Yet here I was, reduced to a cell, awaiting my fate. I could hear the distant toll of church bells marking the passage of time. I would be hanged soon, just another criminal brought to justice in the eyes of the public. But what did they know of justice? Could they ever understand the art of my work, the careful calculations that went into each of my murders? They were small-minded, driven by fear and the need to simplify what they could not comprehend. I began to think about the people who had crossed my path, those who had trusted me, who had fallen under my spell, the young women who had walked into my castle with dreams of new lives, the men who had sought my business expertise, the children who had looked at me with innocent eyes. Each of them had been a thread in the tapestry I wove. There was Emily Van Tassel, a secretary who had come to work for me in the castle. She had such a sweet demeanor, always smiling, always eager to please. I remember the day I decided she would be my next victim. It wasn't out of necessity, it was curiosity. I wanted to see if I could make someone like her disappear without a trace, if I could erase her existence so completely that no one would ever find her. Then there was Julia Connor, the wife of one of my business associates. She was different. She saw through my charm, but that didn't stop her from falling for me. Julia thought she could outsmart me, but she underestimated how much I enjoyed the game. I took my time with her, letting her believe she had the upper hand until the very end. And the children, oh, the children. I don't know what it was about their innocence that fascinated me so. Perhaps it was the contrast, the purity of their souls against the darkness of mine. Howard Pitzel, just a boy, trusted me as though I were a father figure. He had no idea what awaited him. I could still see their faces, hear their voices, but it didn't haunt me. No, it thrilled me. Even in the solitude of my cell, I could feel the power I had wielded over them. May 7th, 1896. The day had finally come. The guards led me from my cell to the gallows, a somber procession of men, determined to see justice served. The noose hung in front of me, a simple device that would bring an end to a life that had been anything but simple. I climbed the steps with a calm dignity, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing me break. My heart did not race. My hands did not tremble. I was H. Holmes, the master of my fate, even as I stood on the precipice of death. The executioner placed the noose around my neck, tightening it with a precision that almost made me smile. I wondered if he felt pride in his work as I had felt in mine. Did he see himself as an artist or merely a servant of the law? When the trapdoor opened beneath me, I fell, and for the first time, I felt something I had never truly known: vulnerability. My neck did not break instantly as they had intended. Instead, I dangled there, gasping for air as the world faded to black. It was not a quick death, but it was fitting. Even in death, I defied them. My death was not the end of my story, far from it. The legend of H. Holmes only grew after I was gone. The newspapers continued to speculate about the true number of my victims, claiming that I had killed anywhere from 27 to over 200 people. The castle itself became a symbol of horror, a physical manifestation of my dark genius. They toured the building, marveling at the hidden rooms, the trap doors, the torture chambers. People came from far and wide to see the place where so many had met their end, but they could never truly understand it. The castle was more than bricks and mortar. It was an extension of me, a living, breathing entity that fed on the fear and confusion of its visitors. Eventually, the castle burned to the ground, taking with it the secrets that I had so carefully constructed. Some said it was an accident, others claimed it was deliberate. I like to think that the castle knew its time had come and chose to end itself, rather than be dissected by the ignorant masses. Even now, long after my death, my name lingers in the annals of history. I am studied, dissected, and debated. Was I a product of my environment? Was I born evil? Or did I become this way? The psychologists and criminologists try to put me into neat little boxes, but they will never succeed. I'm not a puzzle to be solved. I am chaos, pure and simple. The world has moved on, but I remain a shadow in its memory. My story is told in whispers, in darkened rooms, where people dare to look into the abyss but fear what they might find. They call me a monster, and perhaps they're right. But monsters are only reflections of the fears that already exist within us. So, as you read this, or hear my words, ask yourself, what would you have done in my place? Could you have resisted the lure of power, the thrill of control? Or would you too have built your own castle, your own monument to the darker side of human nature? Remember this, I am not unique. I am merely the first of my kind.